And it's the first time that I've devoted an entire show
Yeah.
to Nina Simone. But I had done some research, for instance, to even find out why Eunice, which is her real name, chose Nina Simone. I knew a few of those facts, of course, and I have a tendency to do a deep dive into the research for these projects because I'm fascinated. So just as you've indicated, how can I choose a few songs? Well, how can I choose a few lines or a few things that I want to share with the audience?
Hey everybody, it's Mike Jeffers, Chicago Jazz Magazine, ChicagoJazz.com, and welcome to another episode of Around Town. And today we have quite a treat. We have the great vocalist Bobbi Wilsyn. She is joining us today to talk about an upcoming show at Winter's Jazz Club on Sunday, February 26th. Feeling Good, Remembering Nina Simone. So I cannot wait to talk all about this. Of course, Winter's Jazz Club, Bobbi, as I always like to get all the info up front at first. It's wintersjazzclub.com. Tickets are encouraged greatly because I know she sells out over there. So you want to make sure you get tickets when you see this show, and you don't want to miss this. So Bobbi Wilsyn, welcome to the show. Thanks so much. It is good to see you virtually. I know we've seen each other in person, but not recently. So I'm glad that we are warm and we are virtual today.
And thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be able to talk about this show, and because it's really relevant right now, since this is the first day of African History Month. And then, of course, March is the celebration for Women's History Month.
Yep.
And I chose to celebrate both of those months by presenting this show, Nina Simone, Feeling Good.
So let's talk a little bit about this, because you and I talked a little bit offline here before we started the interview, but at Winter's Jazz Club, which I love, Scott, the owner over there, loves to give artists a challenge, I think, at least at first, and then they run with it. And he's doing themes with a lot of different artists. Now, you and I talked a little bit before we came on, but I want to pick up on that conversation. I love the fact that he's doing themes because it breaks that barrier down. So if you're an audience person and you're unsure about going to Winters, or you're unsure if you like jazz, you know how we always hear people say, oh, I hate jazz, and then they actually like jazz because they don't really realize what jazz is. Knowing what you're going in for and then hearing an artist like yourself interpret it, I think is fabulous. So let's talk about Remembering Nina Simone. What are some of the challenges to pick the repertoire, let alone put the whole group together, and then you're going to tell the stories in between the songs so you can set everything up. But let's just talk specifically about the repertoire. I mean, Nina Simone, there's quite a large repertoire that you can pick from. So how did you even whittle it down to create a show?
Well, first of all, Nina Simone has been woven into my performance career at many levels, many junctures. As a matter of fact, I was performing with a blues group for some time, some years ago. And I'm sorry, I've been in this business so long, the years get away from me, as do the names oftentimes. But I did go to Nina Simone's birthplace to perform a concert.
Wow.
And we chose a couple of her songs, but basically we were doing a concert on the evolution and the revelations of blues, period. But since it was presented in her hometown, we certainly did sing some of her songs. The year escapes me. I was going to go through my file so that I could share it with you, but then that just proved to be more difficult than I thought it would be. I also perform with another group that I'm sure you're familiar with, and that's Cirque Rivera Dance Theater.
Sure.
And when I was with them for many years, they too would do vignettes or themes celebrating a type of music or a particular artist. And I had the privilege at that particular time of performing the segment that was a tribute to Nina Simone. So I learned those songs. And then I also was a part of Joan Colosso's 11 Jazzy Divas.
Right. Yep.
And we would oftentimes in March put on shows celebrating different women in the industry. And it could be anybody who, from an opera star like Leontine Price to Aretha Franklin and Nina Simone. And I was the one who did that particular segment. And then there was a presentation of her film, What Happened, Miss Simone. And I was contacted to be the MC for that particular presentation. And I could probably give you two or three other examples of how Nina Simone has influenced my life, but not the least of which was I grew up on that music coming from Los Angeles, and a few of the songs that I've chosen to sing are my favorites, but they're also everyone's favorites. Perhaps I Love You, Porgy. People know that from Nina Simone rather than actually seeing the opera, the light opera, Porgy and Bess.
Right.
And then, of course, there's songs that people hear for commercials, and they probably don't even know that it was Nina Simone. So I tried to pick the most recognizable songs, but also throw in a couple of surprises. That's how I picked the repertoire from those performance situations where I already knew the music.
Yeah.
From my childhood exposure.
Well, and you know, I didn't realize, but I mean, what a story in itself. All these different connections you had to Nina Simone, just from all these different opportunities to either perform her music or MC or be involved somewhere. And now you're doing Remembering Nina Simone, Feeling Good, February 26th at Winters Jazz Club. So let's talk a little bit about putting this show together, because you described how you kind of pulled the different repertoire together, but she has such a story. And I think a lot of people maybe know the music, but to your point, I'm pretty sure I know there's one tune playing right now on a popular commercial, and I'm positive nobody knows that that's her song, but you know, but you know, just being able to talk about and leading through her life, all of the different things that she was able to accomplish, but also all of the societal effects that she did too. I mean, she had such great reach into all these different aspects. When you're putting a show together like this, you're going to obviously talk a little bit about it and timeline it out, I would imagine. I mean, you could just talk about Nina Simone for an hour and a half. So you've probably got to be a little judicious, but what a fascinating opportunity to be able to tell the history of Nina and perform the music all in one set at Winters.
Yeah. And it's the first time that I've devoted an entire show to Nina Simone. But I had done some research, for instance, to even find out why Eunice, which is her real name, chose Nina Simone. I knew a few of those facts, of course, and I have a tendency to do a deep dive into the research for these projects because I'm fascinated. So just as you've indicated, how can I choose a few songs? Well, how can I choose a few lines or a few things that I want to share with the audience? I'm also in a jazz club, so there are certain things that are might be a little dark or depressing from her life, and I certainly don't want to bring everybody down because it's too hard to build them back up. If I were in a classroom or in an auditorium at a college, I would probably sing and talk more about Mississippi Goddamn. And we did that for the 11 Jazzy Divas, right, as a full group.
Wow.
You know, but that came in the midst of everybody else's performances. But I want my audiences to reflect, but I don't want them to be distracted by the things that are not as positive from her experiences. But I do want to provide them with an impetus, if they should be if so inclined, to maybe listen with bigger ears and perhaps have a curiosity to check out YouTube themselves.
Yeah. Well, and you and I talked too. I mean, you retired a couple of years ago. You were a vocal professor at Columbia College, and you taught classes as well as individuals and private lessons and ran the ensembles and all of that other stuff there. And, putting a show together like this, I think first of all, it's an art form, but second of all, in this day and age, like the past 10 years has gotten away from people actually going out and being social and having to sit in and having to talk to people. I'm talking about from a musician standpoint, especially young musicians, and being able to put a show together like this. I have to imagine that you spent a lot of time talking to your students about the importance of not just going up and calling tunes, which people can go up and call Nina Simone tunes out. But if you have an audience that paid a ticket price to come in and see a show, you need a show, not just a bunch of tunes. You need to be telling a story, as we've been discussing. So I'm just curious because, there's a lot of musicians, a lot of vocalists watching this. And of course, a lot of casual music fans, I think, need to understand this. I mean, well, how would you even start to teach something like this to your students as far as putting a show, not even Nina Simone, just putting a show together, because it's so important. It's kind of a lost art form sometimes, where an entertainer just shows up, plays tunes, and it doesn't have the audience connection that it will on February 26th when you're talking about the history and bringing in these tunes, turning it into a show.
There are certain things that I can probably have my students over the last 39 years repeat to me because I drummed it in. And one of the things that I used to tell them is, if you can apply it to your singing, you can apply it to your life. So when a audience member comes into a performance venue, it's basically like inviting them into your home and sharing conversations with them that happen to have musical inserts. So would I invite somebody into my home and say, have a seat and go in and cook?
Exactly. That's great. That's great.
So come into the club, have a seat, and I'm just simply going to throw the food at you. Just throw it at you without any kind of conversation or how are you or welcoming you. And that's one of the other things, is welcome them and then share the information that as if you were having a regular conversation. Talking about the weather over and over again with your guests can be a little dull and a little boring, if not a lot of dull and a lot of boring. I would tell my students, if you don't have a personality, you better borrow one. Because this is the time to share with your audience and relate to them from your own essence.
Yeah.
If you're a speaker and not a singer, if you're in the front of a classroom teaching, if you're hosting a podcast or hosting an interview, you didn't just say, okay, Bobbi, talk.
Right.
You were prompted by your own curiosities and sharing the information about what you know and what you think and what you question. So when I do my research, I think, and I react to certain things like, why is her name Nina Simone? I figure people don't know that. And it's just sharing the tidbits, not necessarily holding a class, even though they learn a lot.
Yeah.
But that's how I feel the first introductions to a students about preparing a show starts.
Well, and I will say this. Well, and I love what you said, because you are absolutely right. It's a great way to explain it to somebody just at first, you wouldn't invite somebody into your house and have them sit over there and then you go in the kitchen and cook, which is essentially you invite somebody into the club and you go up on the stage and you just start playing and not pay any attention to anything else, not just whatever. Okay, that's our last tune. Thanks for coming. I mean, who would come back? So,
Well, now, I must also say that when you have instrumentalists
Yeah.
and you're in a concert setting, the audience is used to that, and it's treated as if you're at the symphony. You have a program, the violinist does not get up and explain necessarily, but why not? It might make things a little bit more interesting if there was some shared information and not just the fact that it came from a particular movement. It might make it more interesting. But the jazz players, it's not the easiest thing to get up and have a full on conversation about what you're playing beyond the names of the tunes. But that's because they're just not used to doing that. Yep. But see, singers, we deal with words.
Yep.
It just seems like a natural progression to weave the songs together with story. I feel that the best singers are storytellers. Not only within the confines of the first note you sing and the last note that's played, but the setups, perhaps, or the explanation after the song is over. So everything needs to have a rise and a fall and a link and an interest. I feel that's when you put on a show.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I mean, just imagine, you're sitting and watching television and you're watching a show and there's nothing interesting in it because they're not telling a story from start to finish. How long are you going to stay with that? It's not going to be that long. And that's exactly what happens. I don't want to keep talking because you and I could talk about this for the next 2 hours because I got lots of thoughts, but I will say talk about instrumentalists. I mean, I've seen Herbie Hancock a handful of times. He talks sometimes more than he plays, which is awesome because he's telling stories and he's setting it up. And then he obviously starts playing and it's unbelievable. But he could just sit and just play and totally ignore the audience and he'd sell out the room. But he doesn't do that. He comes out, he's engaging, he's talking to people in the audience and everybody else. So I think there's something to be said for everything you're saying. And it's something that people should learn from because I feel like when I'm listening to an instrumentalist and they thank everybody for being there and say, this is so-and-so on this and that. And this is why I played this tune because it means this much to me. It's very similar to what you're describing as far as a vocalist goes. And I think it applies to everything. So I love the fact that you're bringing this up and we're talking about this because I always try to get that relationship happening between us, our show, and the viewers and have them learn something more than maybe just this is when the gig is, So I love the fact that we're talking about this. Are you just a related subject? Are you kind of a history buff? Because I know you do research on these artists. It's got to suck you in. I mean, I'm a history buff. I love learning about people's history because I feel like it always helps me move forward because I take something from all these different people I've read about and learned from. Are you the same way?
I've never considered myself a history buff, but I guess I am inserting the lives into the history as it unfolds, especially when I'm speaking about and singing songs that were made popular by Lena Horne or Billie Holiday or Ella Fitzgerald. I do notice how they had to deal with world wars or the social inequities or misogyny or racism or the Depression. And I think that's one of the things that I didn't really kind of relate to. I knew that maybe they had some challenges, but I forgot or didn't include there was this other larger backdrop in history that they were actually singing through. Yeah. That they were actually creating through, that they were overcoming the circumstances or dealing with them. I loved in my ladies who sing the blues, and I started back with the Smiths, Mamie Smith, and the Bessie Smith.
Yep.
and found out that a lot of those women made a lot of money and had no qualms whatsoever with carrying around shotguns and and being pistol packing mamas, and realizing that sometimes that the Ku Klux Klan and others would end up at their doors. And I said, oh my goodness gracious, of course they have to be armed for bear,
Oh.
just in case a bear showed up.
Well, I find it interesting because just watching some of the old videos, like of Oscar Peterson trio with Ella Fitzgerald, back in the 50s or whenever it was. I mean, it sold out, everything else, but you don't know what they were going through before they got on the bandstand, what they were going through before they got to the gig. And that's why I think when you start reading about it, you're like, oh my God. And they were still able to focus so much and create this kind of art with all of that stuff, horrible stuff going on a lot of times, getting them to the gig and everywhere else. It's fascinating to me. And I think that, I think a lot of younger musicians, because I had to go back and do a lot of research when I was coming up, going to music school, and it stunned me, some of the things that were happening. But it's amazing that they could still produce what they produce that lives on for hundreds of years with what was going on off stage, and people don't really realize that. And that's why I love the fact that you're putting shows together like this, and you're doing some research and able to tell people about that. So, all right. So
the other thing though is this. We're going through all of these changes and considerations about education as we know it. And you and I and the host of others, we love music and we love to observe the progression of the music. But the young people don't even know who these people are. I had oftentimes students who would come in and they said they wanted to sing jazz. And I'd play a little game. I'd actually put on a streaming station and play it and say, who is this? And I was often surprised that they recognized Sarah's voice or Ella's voice, or even sometimes Billy. And let's not even hope that they would understand who Lena, or perhaps even Nina would be. Unless somebody makes a movie of it. Unfortunately, if we don't start to promote the music, then I don't think that it will die, but I certainly do think that the representation will be a lot quieter. We recognize that's what's happening right now, and that's why I tried to pick the older music, the standards, and those people who are singing and playing that music, because that's my contribution to their legacy.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. So, okay. Want to make sure everybody knows this, because we got to wrap this up. But Feeling Good, Remembering Nina Simone, February 26th, 5:30 p.m., 7:30 p.m., Winters Jazz Club, 465 North McClurg Court, wintersjazzclub.com. Get tickets in advance. I'm telling you, it's an intimate room, so they're going to sell out. So you want to make sure you get tickets in advance. And also, I like to always tell everybody, there's valet parking at Winters now. It's not part of Winters, but it's out there on the street, so it's a little bit easier. I think it's like $15 or something like that. But anyways, Scott's got all the information on wintersjazzclub.com. So it's no excuse for you not to get over there. You can park. Everything's great, and go see Bobbi Wilsyn and her quintet that night. Bobbi, thank you so much for jumping on the show today. It was great catching up with you. And that's a fascinating conversation. If we had like 2 hours, we could definitely talk.
Absolutely. I'd like to mention who's on the gig. Miguel de la Serna.
Yep.
Marlene Rosenberg. Larry Brown Jr., Frank Morrison, and Gerard Harris.
Oh, wow.
I think I got them all right. Yes. So we're going to be using those wonderful musicians, and Miguel de la Serna is the musical director and helped us work on all the arrangements.
Well, he's a wonderful pianist. I know he's been playing with you mostly for many years, and a great person as well. So, all right, everybody head over there February 26th to Winters Jazz Club. And Bobbi, thank you so much for being on here, and I appreciate you taking a few minutes.
And thank you for having me. Hope to see you soon.
I'm sure you will. Now that the weather's going to break here soon, maybe I'll even make it over on the 26th. I want to thank everybody also for watching. And of course, as I always say, all information is on chicagojazz.com. And until next time, hopefully I see someone out on the scene.